Hey everyone, Chris here and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to talk to you about the books I read between September 28th and October 4th. First up, I'm going to group these together as they're part of the same series, and that's Tree's Roots, which I gave 4.5 stars, and Mothwing's Secret, which I gave 4 stars, both by Aaron Hunter. These are novellas in the Warriors series. If you're new to my channel, Warriors is a series that follows forest cats that live in clans and have to try to coexist. The novellas are little mini novels that fill in small little gaps in the story, and I can't really talk about either of these little mini novels and what they're about because major spoilers, but we're getting a look at a little bit of Tree and a little bit of Mothwing's lives that fill in a section of the story that we didn't previously know. And I really enjoyed both of them. I like the novellas and how they take a little mini dive into a very specific instance in a character's story that is important to the overall narrative. And it is just so cool how the Aarons continue to add little bits and pieces to the greater Warriors universe. And I'm still really, really enjoying them. And I wasn't sure how I would feel about the novellas, but now that I've read a few, I really like them and definitely think they add to the series as a whole. Next up, I read The Ghost and Mrs Muir by Krista Davis, and I gave this book 4.25 stars. This book is one of my fall covers, which means I can't really tell you anything about it, because if you haven't seen my fall cover video, I will link it below. But basically, I picked 5 books on my TBR, whose covers gave me fall vibes, and then went into them blind to see if they were actually set in fall. So you'll find out more about what this book is about when I do my fall cover wrap-up video, but I did really enjoy this cozy mystery and definitely plan to continue on with the series. Next up, I read The Tower of Nero by Rick Riordan, and I gave this book 5 stars. This book fulfilled the prompt poll pick for Bookathon and published before 2021 for the Fall Under Reading Challenge. This is the 5th and final book in the Trials of Apollo series, which is the 3rd series Riordan has written that is set in the Percy Jackson universe. This is by far my favorite series. Apollo is by far my favorite character in the entire Percy Jackson universe. I absolutely adored this book, and I am so sad to be done with these characters. I found this series to be very humorous because Apollo has a sense of humor, and I was constantly laughing throughout all 5 books in this series. So I really, really love this book, and I'm really sad that I won't be able to spend more time with these characters, but I believe Rick Riordan has announced that he is going to be writing another series in this series. I think he actually is a co-author this time. And it'll be about 2 characters that were featured in this series. So hopefully we might see a bit more Apollo in that series because I absolutely love him and I'm sad that my journey with him has ended. Next up, I read All Standing, the remarkable story of the Jeannie Johnston, the legendary Irish famine ship by Catherine Miles, and I gave this book 4 stars. This book fulfilled the prompt nonfiction for both Phase 10 Chooses My TBR and the Fall Into Reading Challenge, to read a standalone for the Magical Readathon, and the history prompt for Bookathon. So this is a nonfiction book talking about the Jeannie Johnston, which was a ship during the Irish famine. Thousands of Irish immigrated out of Ireland during this famine. Most of them ended up in North America and they were looking for a better life. Many, many people died on the journey from Ireland to North America or shortly after they got to North America due to sickness they found on these ships. And the Jeannie Johnston was remarkable because that didn't happen on that ship. And it basically explains why the Jeannie Johnston was different and goes over some of the details about the Irish famine and how hard it was and how it presented, and also dived into what life was like once these people got to North America, not just on the Jeannie Johnston, but the other ships for comparison, and to explain why the Jeannie Johnston was so remarkable in that people weren't dying and getting sick on it. It was a little bit slow at times, but I did find it an interesting read, and I'm glad that I checked it out. Next up, I read Miss Ellicott's School for the Magically Minded by Sage Blackwood, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. This book fulfilled the prompt 5 or more words in the title for Phase 10 Chooses My TBR, stand alone for the Fall Into Reading Challenge, and read a book with a school setting for the Magical Readathon. In this book, we're following Chantal, and she goes to the school that is supposed to teach young ladies how to behave properly and how proper young ladies use their magic. Chantal doesn't really care about learning how to be a proper lady. She would much rather focus on how to use her magic, which often gets her in trouble. When Miss Ellicott and the other sorceresses go missing, Chantel has a lot more to worry about than her magic getting her in trouble, because the sorceresses use their magic to protect the city. So it then becomes up to Chantel and her friends to find the sorceresses and save the city. So I thought this book was interesting, like the concept, and it was interesting to see Chantel grow and develop as a character throughout the book, because once the sorceresses are gone, she's kind of the main person in charge. Like, it seems like nobody knows what is to be done now that they have disappeared, and she kind of takes charge, and it is interesting to see her try to handle all of that when she didn't really care about how to be a proper lady, and sometimes that hinders her and sometimes that helps her, and it is interesting to see that journey. This wasn't my favorite middle grade that I ever read, and I definitely can't picture myself rereading it, but it was a decent middle grade. I liked getting to see her realize more about the world that she lived in and how the sorceresses played a part in that role and what she planned to do with the information once she found it out. All in all, it was an enjoyable read, but not one I see myself rereading. Next up, I read Shadow Weaver by Marcy Kate Connolly, and I gave this book 4 stars. This book fulfilled the prompt, read a book in a duology for series September. In this book, we follow Emmeline, who has the ability to control shadows, which has left her isolated. And she's learned to survive with only her shadow Dar for company. But then one day, a man shows up and says he can cure Emmeline by taking away her magic. Despite the isolation that it causes, Emmeline really has no desire to lose her magic, and Dar says that she can help Emmeline change the man's mind if only Emmeline will help her regain a flesh form again. Emmeline obviously quickly agrees. But the next morning, the man is found in a coma, and when witnesses say they only saw a shadow near his room, suspicion immediately falls on Emmeline. This causes Emmeline and Dar to go on the run, and Emmeline knows the only way she can prove she didn't do anything to the man is to help Dar regain her flesh form. But after what happened with the man, she isn't sure she can trust Dar anymore. So this was a really interesting book and definitely had a bit of a spooky vibe, because Dar is such an interesting character because you don't really know what her end goal is. And it is interesting to see Emmeline struggle with Dar being the only friend she's really got and the only person she can trust, to then questioning whether Dar is really her friend and is trustworthy, and whether Dar is just using Emmeline for her own end. I was really intrigued with how this book went, and Emmeline's journey from being isolated to being on the run and having to figure out the truth of what's going on and how her magic works, and learning more about herself once she was no longer isolated in her family home. I definitely plan to read the second book in the duology, as it left in a spot where I'm very curious to see what happens next, and given that it's a duology, it's obviously going to wrap up the story, and I definitely want to see what the end of Emmeline and Dar's story is. And it was just a really interesting, spooky, quick read. Next up, I read The Silver Door by Emily Rhoda, and I gave this book 3.75 stars. This book fulfills the prompt sequel for the Fall Into Reading Challenge, and read a book in a series you haven't touched in a year for series September. This is the second book in the Three Doors trilogy. And in this series, we're following Rai, whose city is under attack, and his older brothers have both left the city to try to take care of the monsters that are attacking the city, but they never return. So Rai ends up trying to go after them, and there's 3 doors that lead you out of the city, and you're supposed to go through the door that you're drawn to, but he goes to the door he believes his oldest brother is drawn to in the first book, and tries to track down his older brother. And then in this book, he goes through a different door. And we're following his adventures as he tries to find out what happened to his brothers and figure out if he can help them take care of the monster that is attacking their city. I still enjoy the series. It is an interesting concept with the doors and seeing what is on the outside of the city, especially when Rai has no concept of what might be outside of the city and is realizing that there is more to the world that he lives in than just what he knew about while protected inside the walls of his city. I'm still very interested in this trilogy and definitely plan to finish it out in the near future, rather than waiting an entire year to pick up book 3 like I did between books 1 and 2. Next, I read Wildborn by Brandon Mullen. I gave this book 3.5 stars. This book is set in the world of Erdos, where when children come of age, they get to find out if they have a spirit animal, and if they do, they end up bonding with this animal's spirit. And that creates a very strong bond between the animal and the child, which grants both of them powers they wouldn't normally have. This year, 4 kids present with surprising animals: a wolf, a panda, a falcon, and a leopard. As they present, all 4 children are watched by strangers in cloaks. A dark force is rising and has begun an onslaught that may destroy the world, and the fate of the world is resting on the shoulders of these 4 young children and their spirit animals. So this was an incredibly quick read, and I am definitely curious to see how this plays out with these 4 kids who are learning about what it is like to have a spirit animal and what they are able to do with these new abilities that they have, and learning to not only trust their spirit animal, but getting their spirit animal to trust them. And it is also intriguing because you don't quite know what's going on. You don't know who to trust and who is behind the nefarious plot that is going on. And along the way, you're also learning why these animals are special and why these kids specifically are special. It is not the most detailed middle grade. I listened to the audiobook for this, and I haven't seen the physical book, but I feel like this could be on the younger end of the middle grade spectrum just based on how short it was and how quick a listen it was. But it definitely was intriguing. And I hope to continue on with this series, as it definitely left me intrigued as to where this was going and how the relationships with these kids and their spirit animals was going to play out, and what the bigger story is behind these kids, their spirit animals, and the dark force that is rising. Next up, I read A Whisker of Trouble by Sophie Ryan, and I gave this book 4 stars. This book fulfilled the prompt published in my birth month for Phase 10 Chooses My TBR. This is the 3rd book in the Second Chance Cat mystery series, and in this series, we're following Sarah, who owns a secondhand shop and owns a cat named Elvis, who used to be a stray. In this one, Sarah is tasked with helping to clean out Edison Hall's estate after the collector passes away. Unfortunately, Elvis finds the body of the wine appraiser there to check Edison's wine collection, dead in the kitchen. Edison's sister then shows up and hires some of Sarah's friends to look into the matter, which draws Sarah and Elvis into the mystery. And they must figure out who the killer is before they get away with it. I really enjoy this cozy mystery series, and this was another good addition to the series. I like Sarah and the hijinks her friends get up to, which somehow inevitably involves her getting drawn into these mysteries that maybe on her own she would have never touched. This is definitely a series I plan to continue reading, and I am just really enjoying this series and Sarah and Elvis's journey, and seeing how they continue to solve these crimes that they are reluctant to get involved with in the first place. Next up, I read Lightbringer by Claire Legrand, and I gave this book 3 stars. This book fulfills the prompt diverse characters for the Fall Into Reading Challenge. This is the 3rd book in the Imperium trilogy. So in this trilogy, we're following 2 girls who are born 1,000 years apart, and they have a surprising connection. And there's a prophecy that there is going to be a Sun Queen who will save the world, and a Blood Queen who has the ability to destroy it. And I really enjoyed the first book in the series, enjoyed the second book a little bit less, and then was highly disappointed with this one. There were parts of it I really, really enjoyed, hence why it got 3 stars. Otherwise, it would have been a lot lower. But at times, this book dragged, and I wasn't as into it as I was with the first 2 books in the series, and I wasn't a huge fan of how the book ended, and there were parts that frustrated me a lot. And I can't really explain why that is, because it would be spoilers, but you kind of know where it's building to, like you have an idea, and I was looking for a creative way to get around certain things, and not only did I not get that creative way, I was really unsatisfied with how Claire Legrand decided to take this book and execute those things that I was curious to see how she was going to handle it. It definitely wasn't my favorite end to a trilogy, and I just really wish there had been some different choices made along the way. And it is definitely possible, if you ask me, say 6 months from now, that my rating of 3 stars would actually go down, because I can see me getting more dissatisfied with the ending as time goes on, especially since it wasn't satisfying in the moment. I don't know, based on my opinion of the 3rd book, whether I would recommend this series, because, like I said, I really enjoyed the start to the series, but the ending wasn't my favorite. I am glad that I finished off the trilogy, though, because I hate leaving series unread. So at least I can say I'm done with it now, and I've knocked that series off of my series I need to continue reading list. And lastly, I read The Shadow by James Patterson, and I gave this 1.5 stars. Only 2 people know that Lamont Cranston is the Shadow: his girlfriend Margot Lane and his nemesis, Shiwan Khan. Lamont and Margot are ambushed by Khan, and their only chance at survival is to take a shot in an uncertain future. 150 years later, Lamont awakens to a world that he can't even imagine. The first person he meets is Maddie Gomez, who has some secrets of her own, and knows a lot about the legend of the Shadow. Lamont quickly learns that his arch-nemesis Khan is here in present day, and has way too much power over the city, and Lamont might be the only person who has the ability to stop him. So the reason this got 1.5 stars is because, 1, I was really, really bored. But 2, it went really, really fast, because most James Patterson novels do, just because of his writing style. Otherwise, I think there's no way I would have ever gotten through this book. So, I believe The Shadow, based on the reviews I've read, is like an actual comic book series, and a lot of people who enjoy that comic book series were not happy with Patterson's portrayal of the Shadow in this book. I can't attest to whether it was done well or not, because I didn't even know that was a thing. So if I'm correct, In the Shadow is a comic book series and it's something you're interested in, I would suggest giving this book a pass based on other reviews I've read. My problem with it is I think that I've read too much fantasy. This is more of a mystery, but it has a slight fantasy twist, with the Shadow being able to survive 150 years in essentially like a sleep, and having his body preserved and waking up, and they definitely have special powers. And it is frustrating because I think I have to knock it down stars, because I've read so much fantasy that this very, very light touch of fantasy left me frustrated, because I kept going, well, why did that happen? Where's the more backstory? I want more information on how this works. Or, that was solved way too easily and quickly. That's not how it should have worked, because I'm so used to reading fantasies that are much more like in-depth and have a lot more meat on the bone. And I think that my love of fantasy definitely made me enjoy this book less. So that is also something to keep in mind. If you like mystery and don't mind maybe a bit of fantasy, and you haven't read the Shadow comics and you like James Patterson's writing, maybe you will enjoy this book more than I did. But as somebody who partakes in a lot of fantasy, this just wasn't my jam. I know my mom enjoyed it more than I did, because she really likes James Patterson's writing, doesn't really read fantasy, and has never heard of the Shadow. So that's why I said, if you fit that kind of mold where you like James Patterson's writing, you like kind of mysteries, you don't mind a hint of fantasy in your mystery, and you've never heard of the Shadow, maybe you will like this more than I did. But I've read way too much fantasy to enjoy this book, because again, some things were not explained well enough, or I wanted more to it because I've read fantasy books that would have given me the more. And again, the only reason this got 1.5 stars is because James Patterson books go really, really quickly, just because of the way he writes. So these are some of the books I've read recently. If you've read any of these books, let me know what you thought about them in the comments section below. If you've made it this far in the video, leave me a clock emoji, like this video, and subscribe to my channel, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye!